So many good things happen to me, and I feel so close to all of you because I do come a lot. And the main time some Christians get together is at a special occasion like this. And I think we ought to go to every one we can, if for no other reason. We go and we get a lot of good lessons, a lot of new thoughts, strength in many ways. But also we get to be with other people who believe the same thing we do and are still faithful. I was in California one time, and a family whom I had not known well except in our visits at the Yosemite encampment. But this family made the effort, took the trouble to drive about 50 miles to see me. And after they left, I said to my son, you know, that surprised me because we weren't that close friends. He said, but Mother, it gave them strength because it gives you strength to see somebody that you love still staying faithful. And when I see you here this morning, haven't seen you in a year, some in more than a year, then that makes me feel good that you kept your faith and I've kept mine, and we get to meet in the wonderful opportunities afforded us in the church. So many good things happened to me that I want to share some of them with you. One, in fact, that happened this morning. My daughter, Sarah, says, Mother, you get more freebies than anybody I ever saw. And I do. I'm so fortunate. But when I was 11, I lived on a homestead in New Mexico, and my post office was Buchanan, New Mexico. In 1973, my husband and I went west and went by Buchanan. And now this didn't happen out at our homestead area because there's nothing there now, but in the little town, which is a ghost town now, we found a lot of 4-barbed wire, which all ranchers were using then, but it's real strange, real odd now. And so he took it home. He said, you know, this will be a nice keepsake of Buchanan. And he brought it home and wrapped it around a tree in our front yard. Didn't have anywhere else to put it. And it stayed there about 4 or 5 years. Then I gave it away to a man who likes to deal in antiques. And he made me a plaque about this long. The letters were about this big, Oler. And I have it hanging in my studio. My boys love it. I have 2 sons. And they said, oh, we love that. And I knew they were thinking, who's going to get it? You know, when I get a new quilt or anything, my grandchildren now say, who's going to get this? And I said, I'm going to wear it out. And their stock answer is, well, we believe it. But I wrote this man and asked him if he had any wire left. If so, I'd like for him to make 2 more plaques. And he forgot how big he made the first one. And he made this awfully big. He said when he got through, he had one little piece of wire left for himself. But since I had it here, I thought I would show it to you. Oler, and I'm going to mount it on some kind of rough-looking frame and background, desert background. But I needed that. I needed this because it's 65 years old, and it will really tell a story for my family. Well, as he gave it to me, I thought, well, do I want to take that up and show the ladies in this class that wire? And I decided I did because you may say, well, what on earth do you want with wire like that? And the reason you want it is that you know the story behind it. I know the story behind it. I know the little town, and I know the water that was piped in on trains because there was no water there. And I know the post office and Ms. Clark, who wore tennis shoes all the time. And the barber, and just everything in that town is real to me when I look at this wire. Well, then I think about the need, the emotional need that satisfies in me. And I think maybe we don't know really what the world needs. What can we do? What are we put here for, and what can we give the world? Our main goal in life is to teach the gospel. Tell people about Jesus. Paul said, I am determined to know nothing among you save Christ and Him crucified. He was completely absorbed with that one thing. Now, a lot of other things entered into his life. He knows how to swim. He knows how to walk. He knows how to write a letter and say, send me my coat. You know, he keeps up with what's going on in the world. But his main thrust in life is to tell people about Jesus. And that's evangelization. I told Nelda Clark that we probably had used the word evangelizing so much this week that it wouldn't have a fresh idea behind it today as I talk. But maybe it will if we think about it as satisfying a need. Satisfying somebody's need. First thing we're going to have to learn, more than we know now, is to be very perceptive of what people need. What does somebody need that I, Mary Oler, can satisfy? All of this couldn't have been written in books. You know, it said of Jesus that if everything he had done had been written in books, the world itself wouldn't contain it. And so it would have been impossible for every little thing that we are to do to be written into a book. But that's not the way God meant it to be. He meant for every one of us to have a part. And I thank the Lord for that. It means a lot more to me to put my thoughts, my creative energies into what my neighbor next door needs. Somebody you'll never see, never know. But I know because she lives next door to me. And so that's how open it is. God said, you are earthen vessels. And I put this treasure in earthen vessels. Now each one of us, regardless of age, regardless of financial standing, regardless of health even, each one of us has a responsibility to live Christ and to pass his Spirit on to somebody else. When Jesus came into the world, he began to do good. It said of him that he went about doing good, and here the people thronged to hear him. They weren't hearing just sermons like we have heard all this week, although these have been good. But he started with what they needed. They were sick, they were lame, they were blind, they were deaf, they were dumb, they were poor, they had lost a relative. Don't you see all of that in the people you know? I went to a funeral day before yesterday at the White Rock congregation in Dallas. I didn't go to the funeral. I said that. But I really didn't go because I thought, what can I do that these people will need? They've lost a mother, lost a wife, and a grandmother. But if I just go and sit in the church building, my name will be on the record that I was there, and they'll read that. But I want to do a little more than that. So we served the meal at the Fellowship Hall, White Rock Fellowship Hall, and there were about 50 in their family there from different parts of the country. And I took a dish, but a lot of others took a dish, but I said, now, I don't want to serve. I want to sit with the family. And so I just went around. I didn't eat, but I went around from table to table and sat with them and talked to them about how I love their mother, the sweet looks on their faces when I'd say that. And to two boys who are young Christian men, very fine, I said, and this is not anything you wouldn't have said, but it's just an opportunity for service. I said, you know, we can all be thankful for that scripture that says, wants to die. She won't ever have to do this anymore. And they looked like angels. Just so wonderful. The thought. Usually we think of that as a sad verse. It's appointed unto all men once to die, and we say, how terrible. Turn it around. It's appointed to all men once to die, and how good it is that you don't have to do it but once. And her son said she was afraid to die, but she won't ever be afraid anymore. During this time that I and some of the women were able to visit with the families too, I got a little new view of what can be done for that particular need. Now, Jesus knew that people knew all about sickness, paying bills, being injured, taking medicine, living honorably in the sight of all men, so he said the Good Samaritan was what he would tell. Every bit of that is in the Good Samaritan. And we all know about injuries, we know about sickness, and we know about not having money to pay bills, and we know about having to make arrangements for bills to be paid, and it's all in that story. He said, they asked him, when he told the story, he said, now who was a neighbor to this man? And they said, the one that showed mercy. Jesus said, I came to be ministered unto and not to minister. I came to be ministered to and not to minister. That's what, am I quoting it right? No. Turn it around. Okay. I came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. And Jesus couldn't get that out of his mind as he talked to people. Do something good for somebody. Now, what's all this for? It's to glorify God. Jesus said, let your light shine before men. You're the light of the world, and let your light shine so that men may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Sometimes I think we are overly modest. The thing we have to keep in mind is we do lots of good works, but it's the attitude that makes the difference. We do good works that God may be glorified and not ourselves. And that isn't a new thought to you, but it is a new thought that we ought to keep on doing over and over and over and over. I have a niece here this morning, and that's another good thing that's happened to me. And I'm going to introduce her in a minute because it's such a wonderful thing to have people in your family who love the Lord and with whom you can talk spiritual things. And I think maybe families are very much like Jesus was with Peter, James, and John. Oh, they could get together and just talk about all the things that were in their hearts. But this little girl, Mary, was born when I was 17 and lived in her mother's and father's home. And now she's grown up to be the mother of 5 children, some grandchildren. But when I was planning to get married, she loved me so. She said, she was standing in a chair as I washed dishes, and she said, Aunt Mary, what am I going to do when you get married? And I said, well, you'll get along fine. Mother and Daddy will be here. And she cried, and she said, but I won't have anybody to fry my taters. Mary Lynn Stan. This is Mary Minnick, my niece, and I want to cheer her. She's just... All right, Jesus said, now then, you let your light shine every day. I thought about what people will say when somebody does a good work and say, well, I guess that's his good deed for the day. Is that your Boy Scout deed for the day? But I think we ought to say, well, that's one, but I still have 23 hours. Oh, don't stop on one good deed for the day. But every bit of it is to glorify God. And there's a secret in evangelism. When we do a good work for somebody, we satisfy a need. We don't say, now I'm going to do this to you because I want you to learn the truth and go to heaven. We do it because they are in need. And we see the need. We're perceptive. Barzillai was a man in the Old Testament who saw David and his soldiers, or he heard of them. 10,000 soldiers and David, and they were about to starve to death. There was a lot of civil strife and family strife. And David knew that Absalom's death would maybe bring peace, but that's ahead. And so they're nearly out of food. And this man named Barzillai heard that they were hungry. And so he gathered up 2 other of his friends, and they began to load wagons with things that the soldiers needed to eat. And you read it and count the things. I think there were about 17. They brought beds and basins and lentils and sheep and butter and up to about 17 different things on these wagons, going across the desert, going to find David. When David saw them coming, he must have thought of the first time the town where he was named. It's Mahanaim. And Jacob was going to meet Esau, and he didn't know what Esau's attitude was going to be. Maybe hatred, maybe death. He even made provision for the family to be taken care of as he met Esau. But that night he saw a host of angels, and he said, Mahanaim, God is with me. God's with me every day. A host of angels are guarding me. And so the city bore that name. And now then, Barzillai takes all this food up to Mahanaim. And knowing David as we do, through his psalms and his perceptive nature for everybody he was with, I just imagine he remembered this time when Jacob had said that God is with me. The angels are here, and here comes the food. Evidently somebody said to Barzillai, "Why are you doing this?" And he didn't say, "Well, he's the king and he'll cut off my head if I don't." But he said, "Because the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness." That's the only thing that prompted him to do so much good, because they had need. They had physical need. Well, David loved his attitude so much that when David came down to the River Jordan and was getting on the ferry to go across to go back to the palace, Absalom is dead. And he said, "Barzillai, go home with me. Go home with me and live in the palace." And David said, "No, I can't do that. I'll just go back to the town where my father and mother are buried. But there's somebody else, Chinham, no doubt his son, and take him with you." But you see what good influence came through the fact that somebody knew somebody was hungry. Somebody knew somebody's thirsty. Somebody knows somebody is tired. The secret of evangelism is really strange. Jesus said when the King comes in all of his glory, he's going to say, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came unto me." And Jesus said they're going to be surprised. That has been the furthest thought in their minds as they have fed the hungry and visited the sick and gone to the prison to visit. They haven't thought about how much that's going to do for their soul, but they're doing it because somebody has a need. Because they said, Jesus said, you'll say, "Well, when saw we thee hungry? We don't remember ever seeing you hungry. When did we see you thirsty? When did we see you sick and we came unto you and in prison?" He said, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me." I think back about the occasions in my life through my own family, uncles and aunts, the tenderness I feel toward them in situations just like Jesus was talking about. I remember that one of my aunts could make the best biscuits, and they were big ones, great big biscuits. But you know, a little canned biscuit won't even melt the butter, but hers just spread the butter from one side to the other. The butter was soft and the biscuit was big and the biscuit was hot. And we had syrup and honey and gravy. But when I think of her and all these little children sitting around on benches and how kind she looked, I think of that. I was hungry and you fed me. You know, it was easy for me to listen to what she said, because in the things that were so close to me, she was serving. She saw I had a need. I had an uncle who went out to West Texas. This was Uncle Lewis, Mary. And he went to West Texas where his nephew had died. And the people were in great sorrow and in great need, this little 2-year-old boy. And my uncle went to the funeral home and looked through the clothes that this little boy would have to be buried in. He said, "They're not good enough." They loved that child, and this will be the last time they'll ever see him. And he meant so much to them, I'm going to do something about it. He went to a store in town, and he said, "Is there anybody in this town that can sew and sew fast?" And they said, yes, there was a good dressmaker. He said, "What is the finest material you have in this store to make a little boy's suit?" And she got something out for him. He said, "Well, I want to tell you, a little prince has died. And we're going to, as far as we can, we're going to make him the prettiest little suit that anybody ever wore after he died." And do you know, I've never forgotten how perceptive he was to see this little child dressed up in things he'd never been able to afford. Worn overalls and other clothes all of his life and worked in the cotton patch, but now then, their last memory can be of something that Uncle Lewis was perceptive enough to see. Oh, the love it can generate. I'll tell you, personal experiences has just happened in my life. My grandson, John Oler, is an Oklahoma Christian. And James Neve, who lives goes to White Rock Church, his parents go there. James and John and 2 other boys have rented an apartment in Oklahoma City. And James wrote his mother and told them what they needed. a long list. And you'd be surprised what they needed. They needed a spoon to stir things with, and they needed a pot with a top on it so they could boil rice and it wouldn't boil over. And simple things, but Huldah, the mother, Jane's mother, and Faye, the grandmother, and my daughter Sarah and I got busy. And what did? We didn't even have to read the list. We knew what people needed in an apartment. I've kept house a long time, and I began to think what all I had that I didn't even need. You would gloat, ladies, if you'd go into your kitchen and just clean out a lot of stuff that you don't even need. I just began to pull it all out, and stack it, and I gave away things that I didn't even want, but they look good in that apartment. And I remembered, I was searching through my mind for this need, and I remember when I was 11 and we didn't have a cheese grater. And I had been in homes that had a cheese grater. So I told my mother I believe I could make a cheese grater. And I took the top of a Mrs. Tucker's shortening bucket. And I went outside and with a rock for a hammer, drove nail holes in that thing. And every little bit I'd feel them down. Oh, it felt so good and rough. I just knew I was, and it worked. It grated cheese, it grated chocolate, it grated carrots. You know what I did? I opened a drawer and gave him a cheese grater. Well, it didn't cost much, and it was rusted a little bit, but, it was the funniest thing. As I kept cleaning, I found a grater I'd forgotten I had, and it wasn't rusted. I'd given this to them because I anticipated a need. Well, I got a telephone call from Oregon from a son, and I'm telling him about all these things people are gathering up. Faye and Eve said, well, I'm giving a set of dishes. They're still good, but I'm tired of them, and I'd rather the boys would have them. Paul said, Mother, are you spending any money? And I said, no, I haven't yet. He said, well, I'll send $25 to go on the apartment because there'll be a lot of things they'll need. I went to Goodwill, and I gloated. First thing I did was buy a 4-hole toaster for $7 because I thought how impatient those boys would be if they were all eating together and had to wait on two-thing toaster. So I just bought 4. They're going to love me to death. And do you know, I think maybe they'll read every poem I write that has Mary Oler on it. Not because I'm a great poet, but because I gave them a 4-hole toaster. All right, now that's the way the thing works. You do it because you sense a need, and then they begin to think there's something deeper than this. When Paul, the apostle, when Peter went to Caesarea and was talking to Cornelius, the first thing he did was tell Cornelius about Jesus and how much good he did. He didn't start out saying, now there's several steps you're going to have to take to become a Christian. This and this and this and this, and then you're baptized into Christ. That's a story too, and he told it. But he started out with saying, I want to tell you about somebody whose life is filled with good. He's always doing something good. And they became very interested. Well, do you know, besides learning how to become a Christian, Cornelius gets this wonderful idea of doing good. He's already doing some of it, but then it's going to be half-souled and strengthened by what Jesus had done. And the servants in Cornelius' household no doubt will be better servants than they've ever been because they've heard about somebody else who served. And the men that came with Peter from Joppa, no doubt hearing the same sermon, said, well, there are a lot of things I can do that I'm not doing. When I study a lesson like this, then I begin to think of how little I really do every day that can be a blessing. Oh, we have to be careful not to expect it to happen today because so many things we will never see develop. We teach people in a Bible class. Maybe we teach little children in a Bible class. We may not live long enough to even see them baptized into Christ. But if they can remember how kind we were, if they can remember that a child can remember I fell down and she doctored my knee, whatever, then that's going to have a long-term good result. This idea of I was in prison and you came unto me. Because I lived at Bowles Home 26 years, and I knew children from all kinds of homes and backgrounds. They were all given about the same teaching, the same amount of training and help. Some of them weren't mentally capable of taking as well as others. Some didn't have a follow-up of good influence after they left those home. And they haven't all turned out well. But is there one among us who has all relatives turn out well? I've had a lot of cousins that I wouldn't have married for anything. And they probably say the same thing about me. But now, with a long list of children like that, we see that everything's not going to turn out the way we want it to. But Jesus said, I'm going to say I was in prison and you came unto me. And last year, a young man called me, not a young man now, he's 43, but he called me and told me he was going to prison. And he is in prison. And he writes to me. And first thing I did when he went to prison was send him a stamped envelope saying, write me what all I can do for you. And the authorities wrote back and said nothing. You can write to him, but you can't give him anything. But whatever you do has to go through the inmate trust fund. And with that trust fund, he will be able to buy stamps and engage in some little craft work. Now, you know, that's a sad picture of a man 43 years old, but he's a Christian. Made mistakes, made big mistakes, but he still loves the Lord, and he told me that until the day he went to prison. He said, I've made so many mistakes, but with the help of the Lord, I'm going to overcome them. And he said, this money, if anybody sends me any money, I can engage in some crafts, and I can learn to use my hands better, and I can write my friends. And now then, when I get out of prison 20 years from now, he'll be 63. 20 years from now, I will be 93. And if he gets out on good behavior, it'll be sooner. But what can you do for a person like that while he's there? Well, I know what I've done. I've fixed a small money order and sent it to him because he said in a letter, now when I get out of prison, there'll be $200 reserved for me if I don't have to spend any of it. Can you imagine $200 when you've been in prison 20 years? But he said if nobody gives me anything, my stamps will be taken out of this $200. Well, when I sent that $5 money order, and I have another one addressed to send, and he has written how much he appreciated and how things are going pretty well, that he gets to go to the library and that he's on the garden crew and works in the vegetables, and that they are treating his feet, which were always bad. But he thanks me for writing him. And I think about what Jesus said, I was in prison and you came unto me. You know, we have wonderful jail ministries now. There may be somebody in prison that you know that you could do some little something for. But do you know there are a lot of other kinds of prisons than a federal prison, than a state prison? I think many people have the feeling that they're in prison all the time because maybe they don't know the Lord, maybe they are in a family tension and a bad situation like that until they don't see any way out. They feel trapped. And when Jesus went to Nazareth, he said, I came to proclaim liberty to all captives. Liberty to all captives. He didn't say the people that are behind bars. But he said, I came to do all the good I can for everybody that has a need. So it's just up to us to figure out what people need. What is this that I could do? And I want to emphasize the fact that it doesn't take a lot of money. That's the first thing we think. How much will it cost? How much is it worth? What can I do about it? But our first thought is, what can I do that doesn't cost any money? There are going to be a lot of other places. But I can use what I have to bless somebody today. Maybe a letter, maybe a card, maybe a visit. But that's for you to decide. And I'm thankful I don't have to work all that out for you. When my husband was preaching in East Texas, there was a family of very poor children. A family, a mother, and 4 very poor children. The father was not a Christian. The mother was faithful. Brought the children all the time. Well, I didn't have to keep telling her, now you be sure that the children stay faithful, because she's going to do her part there. But one day a little experience came to me, and my sister was with me, and we drove out. You may have been with us, Mary. I don't know, because I can't think of my sister being there without you when you were 5. You were crazy about her. But I baked a chocolate pie and took out to this family. The mother didn't come out. Maybe she wasn't presentable. I don't know why she didn't come, but these 4 little barefooted children ran out through the trees out to the car, and I just handed this pie out the window. And their eyes, you can't imagine how their eyes opened, and they started running through the trees hollering, "She brought us a pie! She brought us a pie!" And my sister and I just sat there and cried, because such a small, inexpensive thing, but it met such a need for people who didn't have the money to make a chocolate pie. Well, I followed that family some, and I know that as long as the mother lived, she kept teaching them and was faithful herself. Beyond that, I don't know yet. But I do know that that's where we start. At Bo's home, there was a little boy who came into the home who was very disturbed and withdrawn. Didn't seem like anybody much, and you know that is a very traumatic experience, when regardless of what's behind it, a child is taken out of his home and put in with 250 or 275 other children. But one night at a basketball game, I took this little boy across to buy peanuts, and at that time they cost a nickel. I thought of this the other day when I watched this commercial, and that man talking about having to spend a nickel, and he said, "I had a nickel when I come in here." But I had a nickel, and I went over to spend it on this little boy for peanuts. Then at my Bible class the next Sunday, girls' class, people were saying, "Well, what's going to happen to this little boy that's so sour?" And I said, "I believe he's going to improve." And I told the story about buying peanuts and that he was friendlier and sat by me and so on. And one of the girls said, "Who furnished the nickel?" And I said, "I did." She said, "He will never forget it. He will never forget it." That's you satisfied a need. Do you know the church in Jerusalem grew? Several great growth spurts are listed after something good was done, after some need was satisfied. Peter and John healed the lame man at the gate, and then the church grew. Ananias and Sapphira were disciplined, and the Bible says the church grew. And every time some good thing was done that would result in the growth of the church, that very thing happened. The church grew and multiplied. I read a story, a true story, of a woman whose home broke up. And she was loyal to the Lord. She went to church all the time and couldn't understand really why this had happened to her, but she didn't stop going to church. Sometimes we draw away from people who have needs. We draw away and we say, "Well, she'll be able to work that out," or "I don't know what to do about it, so I just won't do anything. I don't know what to say." And about the 5th Sunday after this happened, a woman who had been one of her best friends said, "Good morning, how are you?" And she'd said that for 5 weeks. And this woman just took her by the arm. She said, "That's not enough. That's not enough. We've been friends all these years. You've been in my home. You knew my husband. Our children have been together. And now here when I am in this big change in my life and can't do anything about it except keep on being faithful, it's not enough for my friends to say, 'Good morning, how are you?'" Can we remember that? You say, "Well, I just don't know what to say." Well, learn what to say. And if you talk with the tears running down your cheeks, it won't hurt. Call somebody on the telephone and cry all the way through the telephone conversation. But I love you, and if there's anything in the world I can do to help you, I want to do it. Well, what we can do really is give the world a pacifier. I used to hate pacifiers because I couldn't see the baby's mouth, and I love that smile. But this grandson, I don't have time to talk about him, but this grandson who will be a year old, the 25th, And thank you for praying last year when I was here. I prayed that this child would be born safely. And he's a beautiful child and well. But he has a pacifier. And he puts it in and out when he wants to. He's pretty smart. But one night at church, somebody was carrying a baby out with a pacifier, and a man I didn't even know, but a young man turned around to me. He said, "You know, the greatest invention in the world is a pacifier." He said, "I'm so thankful for that invention because it gives people so many happy moments." It gives the baby happy moments, and it gives the parents happy moments, and it gives the neighbors happy moments. Somebody satisfied a need. Well, the time goes too fast, and I'm going to have to quit. I started to bring a lamp this morning, my Oler lamp, and put it up here, just to let you watch it and see how steady the flame is. Oh, you may not trim your wick, and there may be too much draft in the house, and sometimes you'll see it flicker, but usually, if things are right for it, it will glow that steady light all the way while it's burning. I didn't do it because I had a lot of other stuff to bring, but now I want to think of my life, if I can, as being a steady flame like that lamp. Jesus said, "You are a light in the world." We can give to our children a great light from our own lamp. In my article here, and if you haven't bought the book, you may, but I'll tell you enough that you can think about it anyway. Judge Sarah Hughes was for 22 years the juvenile judge in Dallas. And she said there is no way to estimate the power of family law. Mothers and fathers who can make their children feel that they're wanted and accepted. Oh, how much we need to work on that. These little children are in our care, and when they grow up and are 49, like my oldest child is, he still needs to be loved and accepted. The Bible says that a woman is to love her children. Love your children, and it doesn't say when they're 6 months old or a year old or 3, but even when they're 49. And I'll say sometimes when they don't even like you. Sometimes that comes. Love your children, and that's a blanket rule that we must have. And if we can't have it, we're going to stay out of our grown children's hair. Husbands, too. I said to mine one time when he was very busy, I said, "Honey, how can I help you most today?" He said, "Stay out of my way." And that's important. Stay out of his way. Stay out of your children's way. But you are the one to decide it. I have a little poem here in the book that I wrote when my children were little, but it's on this idea of having a light, your own light that can shine for somebody else. I hold a light as you walk down the years away from me. I hold a light that you may have no fears, but clearly see. I do not know what dangers wait for you within the night, but oh, my arm is strong, my lamp is true. I hold a light. And my prayer for you as we end this 7th year of lectureship, my part of it at least, that you want to remember the word mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. I've heard preachers preach sometimes and just really bear down on what is called points of salvation, but maybe it's pretty caustic. And I think, oh, if we could just remember when they asked Jesus, "What's the greatest commandment?" He said, "Love. Love for God and love for fellow man." Now that's what we carry in our hands and our arms today. Those are the treasures. As we teach people about Jesus, then we reflect that and pass it on to others. Shall we pray? Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for the blessed Word of God and for its purifying effects in our lives. We're thankful that we're able to read and that Bibles are available and that we have time to read and study and make ourselves more like Thee. God, grant that our future plans may be wisely made. We may make the right decisions, always keeping in our mind the fact that we want to teach Jesus and show Jesus to every person we can. Give us mental and physical strength and long lives, if that be best. but help us in whatever situation we're in to know that all things work together for good to those that love the Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mary, and how fortunate we are to be among those who know and love and get to sit at the feet of Mary Oler. I hope that we have you 7 more years, Mary, at our lectureship and then some. Thank you for being here. Lunch is being served in the fellowship room downstairs, and I won't tell you what the menu is. I think it's King Ranch chicken, which is kind of a Mexican chicken, and all the trimmings. But the theme today is humorous things that have happened to me as a preacher, and it's always one of the best times you can have. So come and be with us. You're dismissed.